Thank you all for joining us today for the August DUG4GOV meeting. We're excited to have you here to let you all know that we are recording this session today so that we can post it to a YouTube channel and also share after the fact. So please know that we are recording. Thank you so much. Well, welcome to the August DUG4GOV meeting. We are very excited to have you here today. I am here. My name is Denise Johnson. I'm the Program and Event Manager for DUG. So I'm here to just share a little bit with you about DUG in case you are not aware of Dynamics user group and what we have to offer for you and what's coming up on our calendar. So without further ado, thank you very much. Welcome. Again, my name is Denise with Dynamics User Group. Dynamics User Group, very lovingly called DUG, is a community here for the Microsoft Dynamics users, for the users and the partners. It's a free membership organization. You can join us at any time just to keep up to date on all the good things that we have going on. Would you please advance? Next slide. Great. We have been in the organization or in the space for since 1995. We have over 42,000 community members and we just keep growing. Again, this is a free community for you to be involved with. We offer programs like the Meetup programs and also our virtual events. Next slide, please. As you can see here, we have all of the free programs. From the DUG conferences, a newly added feature, which is the DUG webinars. If you haven't had a chance to check out that calendar, please go ahead and do so. We got lots of offerings out there for you to take advantage of. As you all are here, we have, this is the DUG Meetup. We have 2 upcoming DUG regional meetups. If you happen to be in the Ohio space, tonight kicks off their event. They have a cocktail reception happening at the, oh, it doesn't say it right there, but it happening there in the Ohio area. So if you are in the area, please join us. And then we have an upcoming Southeast regional event that's going to happen in November. So be sure and mark your calendars. Next slide, please. And don't forget, we have DynamicsCon Live coming up in May of 2024 in the beautiful Denver, Colorado at the Denver Marriott Tech Center. So please check that out, take a look, and we have a code to share with you for early bird pricing to get a little extra money off. So thank you so much for being here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug, our gracious host from the DUG4GOV team. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. So just a quick couple of announcements from a DUG4GOV and Microsoft perspective. So very excited to announce our September session, which is the September 26th. So this is going to be our friends at Hennepin County. So Hennepin County created a new system in a very short period of time to track requests from internal county employees around naloxone, easy for me to say. But basically it's a medical device that the county employees can use in different circumstances. And again, the session that's going to be presented by Jesse and some of the folks in Hennepin County is really amazing. They did kind of the whole thing in about 180 hours. So very excited to see that. So that's next September. And Rojy, if you can click next slide. And then last but not least, and then we'll kick it over to our presenter, but don't forget September, we also do an in-person, we do this really once a quarter. So if you're in the Austin area, there'll be more details sent out, but basically we'll meet in the Microsoft office like we did previously this year. And we'll have an in-person session right before, we'll do it at 9 o'clock and we'll go 2 hours. And then at 11, we'll join the national, this meeting for Jesse and the folks in Hennepin County. So the exact agenda for that meeting, we're still kind of working through, but we'll make that announcement shortly. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker. So Rojy Thomas is a cloud solution architect at Microsoft. Rojy is probably one of the people I go to most for information and technical questions that are even deeper than I have. And Rojy's going to walk us through Access and how you can migrate Access into Power Platform. And Rojy, you're based out of Seattle, and I know
Yes.
Rojy's in a hotel, so that video might be a little pixelation. Those of us who travel on a frequent basis, hotels are always fun experiences when presenting. So, Rojy, feel free to come off video once you kind of get started. I know that'll probably help your bandwidth.
Sure. Sounds good. I advanced the slide, Doug. Could you confirm that you can see the intro slide?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As Doug introduced, Rojy Thomas, Cloud Solution Architect, specializing in the Power Platform and Dynamics 365 customer engagement space. I've been with Microsoft for roughly 12 years, all within the topic area, relative technologies of the topic area that we want to talk about. Microsoft Access has been around for a very long period of time. So if you know, it's been around for 31 years. So over the course of period of time, folks have done a lot of good work with Microsoft Access in general. But today, as organizations look to see what's next after Access, some of the technologies that I specialize in comes into play. So let's first dive into looking at some of the challenges organizations have with Access. Some of them might be obvious to you. You probably know them. Some of them you probably haven't thought about, but they do exist in different shapes and forms and fashion, right? So let's first take a look at the first thing that are there. Let's begin looking at some of the challenges that organizations like yours may be facing leveraging Access databases for enterprise data storage. So I'm going to turn off the camera here because I'm getting a little bit of a delay. So turn off the camera. So first and foremost, security is of utmost concern in today's government. Determining who may interact with data and to what extent, as well as the auditing of the changes made to data, is key. So as you all know, that Microsoft Access basic have very minimum security to start with. Usually have a password, don't have a lot of more security controls that we seek in 2023 is not available in Access, right? So that's the first thing that's there. The second is replicating tables across database, prohibiting data sharing. So that means, first and foremost, security is of more concern. Today's government determining who may interact with data and to what extent, as well as auditing changes made to data is key. So being able to figure out, hey, if I replicate this data across multiple databases, which data is correct? So that is usually an issue when we deal with Microsoft Access databases, because one department may have one version of the truth, and there's other departments who may have different versions. Then figuring out which version is the true is obviously of greater concern. The third is obviously around performance. So you know that as an individual who have built Access databases in the last 20 years, data performance with 1,000 rows is one thing. Data performance with over 500,000 records is a whole different game, right? So Access typically do not work well with high volume of data at that level, and just go to the component of scalability. That's without an issue. Size limitation. So there are different type of versions of Access have limitations as to how much data can I put it in one Access database. So organization typically would go say, hey, I'm going to extend a second replica of that database just so that I can make this work, because I'm to the peak of the first database. I'm going to create a link database to the second one, and goes on and on and on. And that at pretty much at some point you realize that this is not a scalable approach. Database sprawl. So I work with majority of our state and local government customers in the US. All of the customers that I deal with talks about in different departments or agencies, they have hundreds, if not sometimes thousands of databases that are there, But organizations struggle to get the arms around which databases are important, as well as we have no visibility, so to speak, as to what databases are out there. And disaster recovery. There is, as you know, with Access, you have a file, you may have backup of those files, but the files get corrupted. And over time, if it's not stored in a place where a recovery is possible, that would be the end of that Access database. So that does happen. There is no DR functionality built into Access, or neither is it perhaps if it's stored in someone's laptop and the laptop wasn't backed up for some reason, there is no recovery of that database, so to speak. And lastly, I would say mobility. So in today's world, every data that you store, there is probably a need for it to be accessed in the mobile world. Access certainly do not do that. So these are like the high level challenges that we see across organizations, especially in state and local government, leveraging Access databases. If I may add one more item on here, is that maybe 15 years ago, when you started storing these Access databases, storing this data in the Access databases, perhaps there was no need for a citizen to access some of the data. Over time, there might have been an additional requirement to say some of these databases that we are actually storing at the core raw level at an Access database, there is probably a need for citizens to access them. So how do we enable that functionality is key. Even though it's not listed on the slide, as I was preparing for the session, I thought, hey, that is obviously something that organizations, especially in government, might be needing to look at that. So now that we have addressed the challenges, let's talk about what is Microsoft's position to this particular challenge. It's great to talk about all the challenges. Most of it, if not all of it, you might be already aware of. So let's look at where's Microsoft's roadmap as you are actually transitioning from Accesses to what. So, and what we bring up is Microsoft Dataverse. So since this is Dynamics user group, the term Dataverse is probably all very familiar to you. But if not, let's just do a quick intro of what Microsoft Dataverse database is all about. It's a cloud-based data storage and management platform that is part of the Microsoft Power Platform. So essentially, if you know Power Platform can be used for many, many different things. Just know that there is a SaaS database that is available in every Power Platform environment called Microsoft Dataverse. So those who are attending this call from a Dynamics heavy background, you're probably using that for about 15 to 20 years, and it's nothing new. We changed names, but at the same time, it's the CRM database. It's available for you to be storing that context of data, and provides a way to securely store and manage that data to be used within your app framework. So just going from a place where this is very much highly on like a password and all of it is accessible to you, to get to a level where row level and field level security is enabled for you. So that is one of the foundations of Dataverse, is that every single scenario you can relate that to the person and really understand, should they be having access to that row as well as the column. Third, allows users to define data models and build relationships. So since we are coming off of Access, in Access, a user is able to create tables as well as define relationship, as well as create forms on top of that data set, right? So Dataverse allows similar structure where you could create tables with a WYSIWYG type of tool, as well as define relationship to other tables, and then build apps on top of that data structure. So Dataverse allows you to do the same thing from an end user's perspective, as well as you can create an end-to-end business process using technologies that work with Dataverse really well. So those are like the 4 components that I thought about. Where do Microsoft expect that Access database to be going to? It is Microsoft Dataverse. It has high-level capabilities of all of the things that I mentioned here. I'm sure it's actually in the chat. So if you have any questions here, please put that on the chat window, and Chris and Doug and the others would be able to answer it. If not, I will address them at the very end as well. So let's do a quick comparison. My last name is Thomas, so I always, when someone tells me, someone trying to convince me, I always second out them. So let's just do a quick comparison about within Access and Dataverse. So the first four or five sections, you can see they are very similar in nature. You can have structured data. It has Office integration, obviously, data export capabilities. They are all there within those two platforms. But as you start to look at the fifth row down, you can see there is foundational differences as to how we think about it, because we need to enable and lighten those functionality. So if you were to do the exact same thing in Dataverse, we won't be able to accomplish that, right? So let's just look at duplicate detection. So certainly you can enable that functionality into Access, but in Dataverse, it's actually enforced. Scripting and workflow. So for example, if I wanted to do some type of automation within Access, people have historically done a lot of what we look at it and frown upon these days in the last 30 years, right? So VBAs, macros, that really take over a machine's control. In today's security world, first of all, running macro is considered as like a big security thing in the first place on a laptop. So let's take a look at that. And when we compare that against Microsoft Dataverse, you have modern technologies such as Power Automate that enables you that function. And we'll make a real one-to-one comparison in the next coming up slides, but I just wanted you to realize that. So let's take a look at the last maybe 5 or 6 components on this starting with Azure AD connectivity, or nowadays we call it Entra. So Entra security or connectivity. So you can certainly map a user from a Azure Active Directory or Entra scenario into a persona in Dataverse that drives the entire security at a data level. That's the foundational things that we are actually displaying there. And last bullet also, I will just highlight mobile enabled, right? What does it take? So if someone actually comes to you and say, hey, the Access database that you have in that network share, yeah, we wanted to make sure that it works on your phone. What do? You don't have a great answer unless you move that data into a place where an app can be quickly built, which is the Dataverse. So from a quick comparison standpoint, sure, some of these functionality looks almost the same, but there are very different functionality available in Dataverse that enables you to build apps on top of that data structure. So now let's take a quick comparison. What are the things that you need to consider prior to making a move, right? So as an organization, you look at the Access databases that are available. There might be hundreds, if not thousands of them that are available. So first thing, our recommendation is that let's start with a very less complex databases, because the reality is there are databases out there in your organization. They are very complex to manage and understand, because it might be created by 7 different people because they inherited from a previous person. Then they further did it, and you look at them, it probably have 40 tables and it has relationship all over it. Perhaps not the first one to try it on, in my opinion and in our opinion, because there are learning lessons that you need to have and you need to start with. Maybe not a very simple one to 2 tables is not what I'm talking about. Perhaps we should start with one that has 5 to 6 tables. And that would be a great way to get to understand the migration process and how to handle exceptions during the migration process. So good learning usually happens when you take that mid-tier complex Access databases as opposed to too easy or too hard. Then there's the things to consider. Where do I move this to? You can move it to one or the other. So you can move it to Microsoft Dataverse, or you can move it to Dataverse for Teams. So If anyone in the call is not familiar with Dataverse for Teams, just know that it's part of your Office 365 as part of using a Teams. You have the capability to spin a simpler. I shouldn't use the word simpler. Simpler is not the word I was looking for. Maybe a lesser capable Dataverse is available in Microsoft Teams. It's called Dataverse for Teams. You can make the move to say, figure out, hey, do I want to move to Dataverse? That is the full version, and or the Dataverse for Teams, which is embedded into the Teams framework. Couple of things you have to notice. I'm not going to go through line by line on this. Couple of things you wanted to consider when you talk about Dataverse for Teams is that, do you always want it to use in the construct of Teams? Then Dataverse for Teams might be okay. How large is the database system? Is it going to be over 2 gigabytes? And there is a row limit as well. If it is there, Dataverse for Teams may not be applicable. You have to go into Microsoft Dataverse, the full version of the database too. Those are things to consider, figuring out, should I be moving this data to Dataverse, or should I be moving this to Dataverse for Teams? There are other factors also, but just know that it's a less capable version that is available for Dataverse Teams. It has storage limits, as well as the context of where these apps can be used has to be in the construct of the Microsoft Teams framework as well. So those are things to consider between Dataverse or Dataverse for Teams as the destination for the access data. Also, there's another construct also that you need to consider. Even though when you look at some of these marketing type of videos, you might feel like this is very all of this data is going to go over. That is almost true, but there are certain data types, because granted, this access has been around for 30 years. It has a lot of history / baggage associated with it. So there is some data types that will not convert over to Dataverse. So that's why you sort of have to look at them in the beginning and figure out, hey, I look at this data structure, almost all of these data types will migrate over to a supported type of column in Dataverse, but there are certain types that do not migrate over, and there are details within the link that I have there that actually talks about how to mitigate that prior to making that migration to Dataverse. So for example, only object or calculated columns or rich text. Those are all some of the exception scenarios that you have to look to see, hey, if my tables have these data types, there are instructions to say, how do I mitigate that prior to moving over to Dataverse? And once you move this structure over to Dataverse, one of the things that throws off people who are, for those Dynamics folks in this call, this is not new to you because you've been probably dealing with this for many years, but who are relatively new to Dataverse really throws you off, because assume that you move data from, let's just say I move 2 tables, then you look at the destination and notice there is about a lot of other tables are there. So you started with 2 tables, then you look on the other side, the tables have lookups and it has a relationship to other tables that are there, and it throws off many people. Things to notice is that, remember, Dataverse is a database that really rely on security quite a bit. So there are n number of relationships it will create to other tables that control that security model, such as the business unit, teams, as well as the users. All of those are related tables that are already there in Dataverse that it will create a link to, as well as it will have currency and currency fields that are available there too. So you might start with 2, then you start looking on the right-hand side of the equation at the Dataverse and realize there's so many tables, because by default, we will try to make relationship to that organizational based hierarchy within Dataverse that are there. So that's things to know so that it doesn't throw you off right away. as well as this is small text there. Apologize for that. Just know that every Dataverse table, when it reaches the destination, will have all of these columns there too, because because the capability of auditing is super important for us in Dataverse. Who created the record? Who modified them? And when did they modify? When did they create? Those are all captured in all Dataverse records there. So that's something that we use for auditing functionality. There are also time zone conversions, as well as currency fields, as well as teams, business unit. All of those columns are included in all Dataverse tables. So just know that you might have a table that has, let's just say, 15 columns. When you migrate that over to Dataverse, for one, you will see a lot of relationship created to other business unit teams, users type of table, as well as you will see an additional maybe 15 columns created in Dataverse that is for keeping track of organizational hierarchy to understand access to those records, as well as for auditing purposes. Those are two realities why these columns get created on the Dataverse side of things. So now, I talked to you quite a bit about all of the things that are there, right? So I talked to you about, hey, these are things you should do. Assume for a second that you're convinced. Okay, he gave me the spiel for the last 20 minutes about why I should move this to Dataverse, some of which I am very convinced. What are the two things that I need to do? One is from your perspective. The other one is from an administrative perspective, right? First, if you have Microsoft Access installed on your laptop or your work machine, you need to be at a particular build or higher. At this point, pretty much everyone is. I have not ran across a Office 365 or Microsoft 365 customer who is not in this build or a higher. But just know there is a requirement. So if your Microsoft Access is not been updated for the last year and a half, perhaps you are at a lower version, you need to have this version or higher. But again, I believe at this point, it would be a very few minority of folks who might be in that category. That allows you to, so if you hit the external data tab within Access, you will see as a destination, Dataverse is an icon that will show up there. So that's actually from your client side, that is the requirement for you to be migrating data to Dataverse. Then there is the server side of things, right? So where do you need to create the data to? In our general guidance, you go to a Microsoft site. It might actually tell you, hey, sign up for a trial environment and such. But just know that in GCC or the government cloud, there are no trial instances. So you will have to be asking an administrator, a Power Platform administrator, for you to get access to an environment where you should have a minimum rights of an environment maker, which will enable you to create tables within there. Because at the end of the day, you need to be able to create tables at the destination. So there are two things, one on the client side and the other one, the server side. You need to have an environment, and you need to have a security role of environment maker so that you could actually create those tables when we get migrated over. Just of a high level requirement as to what it takes to get started. Okay, so, and I'll move over to the second slide. Doing a real-time demonstration is a tricky one. There are many folks who is in this call that I work with, maybe not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. I'm a fan of actually showing demonstrations live, but in this particular scenario, I'm just going to play a 2-minute video that shows a high-level process of migrating access to Dataverse. So hopefully you all can hear this. After the 2-minute video, I'll come back and explain what happened. It should be self-explanatory, but let's just run the video, okay? Okay. So, so you saw the video. It was pretty obvious, I think, but I think I'll just do some explaining as to what's actually happening. So you start with Microsoft Access, then you go to the external data tab and hit the Dataverse. And first thing Access does is that it actually validates just to see if all of the components are able to go into that specific Dataverse instance. So it will just do a quick validation. If it is validated and everything is successful, it will ask you to say which Dataverse environment the one that you have access to will be displayed. And then it will migrate the tables, it will migrate the data, and it will create the relationship between those tables. So that's essentially what it does, right? And at the end it says, hey, you can build one of these apps on top of those. So, and it showed a Canvas app as an example of the app that you can create. It also talked about, hey, going forward, what it does behind the scenes in Access, it will create a link table to the Dataverse tables so that you can continue to use the Access front end while the data gets stored in Dataverse. That's what it talks about. But let me pause there for a second. In my experience, there are some limitations as to how that works. So everything in that video, I say they are good, but there are quite a bit exceptions when it comes to starting to use the Access front end going forward and continue to hit that in the Dataverse and vice versa. Just know that from working experience, I would say that continue to using the Access form going forward may need to be considered at a case-by-case basis as opposed to working every single time. Okay. So what did the process migrate? This is a question that comes to everyone, right? Because Access is not just about tables and relationship. It has a lot of other components as part of it. So the tool or the add-in that we had in Access migrated the tables, migrated the data, created the relationship between these tables that you may have within Access. That's all it did, right? But if you talk to someone, or if you are a person who actually works with Access, there's a lot of other components such as forms, queries, scripting, macros, scripting/macros, reporting. All of those components are there. The tool did not migrate all of that. So it has to be sort of handled on a separate basis. But people think of them as, when they initially see the slide, it'll be, oh my gosh, there's a lot of work. But all of these are fairly easy to do this in the Power Platform, in the Power Apps framework. So let's start with forms as one of the first things that it did not migrate over, right? There's two types of forms that you can create within the Power Apps framework, right? Canvas applications as well as model-driven applications. So those who are, we are not going to deep dive onto the differentiation between Canvas apps and model-driven apps. So you could create those same forms in Canvas apps, or you could create them in model-driven application. Model-driven application exclusively works on Dataverse, and Canvas applications can work with multiple data sources with ease. So you sort of have to figure out, hey, is this particular form that I have on top of this Access database, are we okay with a model-driven application, or do I have to actually create Canvas application? So because remember, we started out with forms over data on the Access side. So if there isn't a big need to be creating a Canvas application, my suggestion would be to stick with a model-driven application because it's relatively easier to build as compared to a Canvas application, right? So that's the first thing. Forms will take care of that. And I actually made a point earlier that, hey, if you were actually going to have this to be exposed perhaps to citizens outside of our network, you can consider doing Power Pages too. So Power Pages is another type of Power App that you can build on top of that Dataverse structure. So first thing that you have to determine is it going to be a Canvas app or a model-driven app, or it's going to be external facing? Then I'll have to look at Power Pages. So that's the first thing that you have to sort of think through. The second thing is queries. Queries in Access are equivalent to views in Dataverse. So just know that there is a couple of queries that is there, might be combining a couple of tables that are there. In our world, in the Dataverse, that actually will be translating into views. And I have a screenshot of, if you were to create a Canvas application, a view would be a filter similar to the screenshot that I have. And or in a model-driven application, it would be a view displayed on the top section, right? So that's how you translate a query scenario to the views that you have in Dataverse. So depending on the app type that you're trying to use, you will pick that. And Power Pages obviously, picks up the views and the forms, etc., from a model-driven application configuration. So those who are developing in that space is probably fine there. So far we covered forms and queries from an Access database standpoint. Let's talk about scripting and macros. So we have a variety of options in Dataverse when it comes to this component, and none of which requires any type of coding skills to start with. I have the second slide where coders have a place. So the first is, typically when you look at Access databases, it's actually written all over the place. It could be written at the form level, it could be at the control level, it could be at all different places as to how a macro or a form is functioning. So there are a few different scenarios that we can do. First, I will say in Dataverse, there is a concept called business rules. It's very similar to JavaScript, actually, how it embeds that can be set at that's not a concept just for a model-driven app. It can be functioning in Canvas apps as well if you set the scope of a business rule to be at the table level. So you could do business rules. Then if you're okay with running these process in an asynchronous manner, you can use Power Automate. So Power Automate enables you to run. So for example, historically, there is a lot of code written in Access database to call like a send mail functionality, or to call the Exchange server directly and all of that, like 20 years ago. But today's world, if you want to do the same functionality, you could easily leverage a Power Automate that could send out an email using the Office 365 connector. And last but not least is the workflow engine that is still available within Dataverse that can do synchronous as well as asynchronous calls into Dataverse. So I typically tell customers is that there are a variety of options of automation that is available in Dataverse and the Power Platform. Knowing when to use which is an important aspect of it. So these are the three low-code methodologies that are available. But those who are developers within this call also can write JavaScript that is enabled on the model-driven application, as well as if you are a C# developer or a .NET developer, you can write plugin code and immerse that into the Dataverse platform too. So these are obviously advanced topic. I don't expect an average Access user to be writing JavaScript or plugin, but just know that we have a no-cliff attitude when it comes to Power Platform development. So all of the things that we talked about is low code, but at the right time, we are able to bring in a developer and have those JavaScript or have that plugin written on top of the work that might have been done by a business user or a business analyst. So we talked about forms, queries, scripting, reporting. So there are a variety of reporting options that are available in Dataverse too. First is charts and dashboard in a model-driven application. So I have that embedded here. They are all drill down capable too. So you can create using Visivic tools. You can create charts and dashboard in model-driven apps. Power BI reporting is available. So most of you probably are aware of Power BI reporting. Power BI reporting is available in Dataverse too. So you can create reports just like you are reporting on other sources. Those who are actually familiar with SQL Server reporting services or SSRS, you can create them within Dataverse too. Just a small catch is that you won't be able to use standard NC SQL. You'll have to use a model called fetch XML against that Dataverse data. So there are n number of reporting capabilities that are available in Dataverse that enables you that functionality too. So we hit those. If I go back a few slides back, we talked about forms, queries, macros, as well as reports not being converted, but they are all can be enabled in Dataverse with almost no coding for the end user. So again, this is about learning a new tool set for many, but we have programs that makes folks aware of how to create them so that you can successfully migrate one of those off to Dataverse. Just going to the point, start with a medium complexity access database, not a heavy 30 table access database as the first one. So there are one more slide that I have on reports. Also, it's important to know that there is a TDS endpoint available in Dataverse that allows you to query using SQL Server Management Studio too. So just because the data is stored in a SaaS database in the Microsoft Cloud called Dataverse doesn't stop you from querying that database. So if you are a SQL Server, if you are expert, and I spent a lot of time there in my earlier days. So this is a home for me. You can write queries against this. Just know that all CRUD operations are not supported. It's a read-only database that is available for you to query this database if you choose to. It actually adheres to the security model too. So for example, if I have access to 15 rows within a table based on the security that we talked about, it only will show you 15 rows. So there is no bypassing security just because you are able to query through the SQL Server Management Studio. TDS endpoints adheres to the API to make sure that you have only access to the rows that you have access to. So there are n number of possibilities there when it comes to reporting as well. Okay. The other thing that I get asked when I talk about access databases is linking to other databases. For example, the IT developed access databases typically have a concept of, hey, I have an access front end, but there is SQL Server data that I'm actually getting to. No problem. Depending on the type of apps that you're developing, you can link to other tables too. So for example, if you're creating a Canvas application, it's not an issue because Canvas application is meant to be able to connect to multiple data sources, right? So you just use the PowerFX formula bar to combine two data sources together. In model-driven application, again, we have a couple of different options for you. You have a concept of virtual tables that enables you to bring data from other data sources. The data and metadata may look like it's coming from Dataverse, but in fact, it's actually linked to an external data source. You can actually create a Canvas page or a custom page rather, or embed a Canvas application within a model-driven application. So these are all options when you are migrating an access database over, and perhaps that access database had a link to an external source too. These are all things that you can do on the Dataverse side of the equation. So now we are taking a small pivot, right? Okay, we talked about one of the foundational pieces why organizations wants to move to a storage like Dataverse. It's a lot about security. So going from a password managed access database to Dataverse, I have an example of, imagine you have a security group within Azure called Power Platform Canvas app users. In Dataverse, we can map that into a security role, and security role gives access to what kind of data that you have access to. In other words, let's just say I'm a customer service representative in your Azure AD security group. I can say, hey, this maps to this security role in Dataverse, and that essentially will drive what records that I have access to within that. So you can see I can easily map a persona-based mapping even at your Active Directory level to the data, and even at the row and even at the column level, frankly, to say these are the data records that you have access to. So no matter how they try to get to this data structure, it will adhere to that model, because we have a persona-based modeling within Dataverse that allows us to secure the data in that structure. Then the next construct is, so, okay, now that I have given them access to the proper data structure, how do we ensure that people don't link them with other places where we don't expect them to be doing that? That is doing through data loss prevention policies. So you can see in this particular screenshot, I have a Dataverse, access to Dataverse environment where I'm saying the business connector is Dataverse, and connectors such as Twilio or Twitter are considered as non-business. So that essentially means that these two data storage cannot commingle together as you are developing an app or an automation in the Power Platform, making sure that organizations' data does not get leaked to sources that you may not expect them to be. So that this is an admin setting, obviously, but just giving you for reference as you look at those securing the data structure. So now that we talked about a lot of components, sure, there is a lot involved in making this and making it securing within your enterprise. The future sort of looks similar to this. AI-based assistants called co-pilots that enables to build that application as well as build that automation. It's not available in GCC tenant yet, but hopefully in the near short term, you would have co-pilots available for you to build that app once the data get migrated, or build that automation that might be coming up. I didn't plan to go extensively on this topic just because it's not available in GCC yet, but in the near future will be there, so you could build upon that. And some of the related links that we have for this particular item. So the first, access to Power Platform. That's first one gives you an overview of what all the process would look like. And the second link that I have there essentially goes into the details of all the components. So that would be your primary link to make this happen. It shows the exception criteria as well as the other things that you need to consider while you're actually trying to attempt it. Hopefully, I gave you a high-level overview of all things involved as you look from migrating some of those access databases that you have in your enterprise. I'll turn on my camera. Doug, not sure if there is any questions that was left for me. I'm sure you answered probably all of them, but I just want to be available for questions.
Yeah, your presentation was so thorough. I think we got 2 questions, so perfect.
Okay.
One of which I think you covered, but a question came up around, is there a validation process where we can go through these access apps and see if there's going to be like maybe columns that don't come over? And can you do that kind of at a whole access database level, or do you have to try to import it and then use the data access validator to see if there's any issues?
Sure. Yeah. The latter question's answer is there isn't a tool that is available that would check for it. But there are 2 types of errors that I have seen that happens often. One is around the data types that do not migrate over. So the validator will catch those and will give you an error right away. The second scenario is unclean data in access. It doesn't do that. It doesn't do a great job. Let's just say you have a foreign key that is set to another table and that foreign key do not exist. In other words, it's bad data at that point. Right. It doesn't do a great job at that validation, and it will error out. So we'll kind of have to roll back and try again, things like that. So you have to do them. The validator will catch the non-convertible columns, but it doesn't take care of bad data structure.
Right. Okay. Very good. I think the one thing I would add is just when I talk to customers about kind of what do I do with access, they kind of think of it from a few different points of view. And I think this is common to just app transformation in general. Is the first question is, do I need this app, right? Is the data good? Do I need it? Is this something that's going to live for a while, or can I just get rid of it? That's number one. And then number two, if I'm going to keep it, what's the best place for it, right? How do I protect it? How do I make it scalable? How do I keep it from exfiltration of data outside the enterprise? And so that's where I think this tool comes into play, is you can secure that data, get it on a modern platform, keep it from getting into the wrong hands, and then you can decide, do I leave the access front end on there, or do I just go in and do a quick power app to kind of migrate it and transform it into a kind of a modern app? So I don't know if you're seeing the same things in your world, but that's how I typically talk to customers about this process. Rojy, anything else you want to add? I know that's all the questions we have.
All right. Sounds good.
Yeah, the thing I'm looking great, and we'll kind of wrap up with this. You kind of touched on Copilot. So we are starting to see some Copilot in GCC. It's the first place we saw it was preview for customer service. So it's definitely on the way. And this whole concept of using natural language to create apps and create flows is going to make all this much, much easier. And obviously we've been playing around with that internally, and you'll see us start to just expand on that. And you'll see that in Power Pages, you'll see it in Power Apps, you'll see it in Automate, you'll see it kind of throughout the whole tool. So very excited to see where we kind of take that natural language to app building concept. So Rojy, I just want to thank you. I think we can end there. I haven't seen any other questions come through. Thanks for everyone in attendance. Don't forget September, we're going to have Hennepin County for those on the national feed, and then local to be determined, but you'll hear more information on that session as well in the Austin area.